Welcome to Bonfire Conversations. I'm Hamid Reza Nikofar, and today I have a legendary composer and audio director joining me from Japan. He's the mind behind the unforgettable music of Hideo Kojima's games like Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain, Death Stranding, and Death Stranding 2 on the beach. My guest is the Swedish genius Ludvig Forssell. In this episode, Ludvig and I talk about his childhood in Sweden, his move to Japan, and how he landed his first gig at Konami and later at Kojima Productions. We dive into his long-standing collaboration with Hideo Kojima, the evolution of game audio, and much more. Before we begin, please consider subscribing to Bonfire Conversations if you're enjoying the show. It's available on YouTube and all the major podcast platforms. Thank you for being here. This is my conversation with Ludvig Forssell.
Attention, ladies and gentlemen. Due to unforeseen technical difficulties, the following program will be presented in audio only until the timestamp displayed on screen. At that time, your regularly scheduled video broadcast will resume, featuring two fine gentlemen in conversation. We appreciate your patience. And now, back to the show.
I've been wanting to talk to you since Metal Gear 5, and every time, for some reason, it never happened. But this time, it was different. I live in Iran, and you might know that the country was bombarded a few weeks ago, and the internet was cut off. And I remember moments before getting disconnected and thrown into a war, I received an email asking if I was interested in interviewing you. And I was like, yes, but I know I'll be alive for that. I don't have the internet. But so, well, everything is worked out that I survived, and here we are after many years. I can't believe it.
That's so cool. I mean, it's good that everything is all right now. Been a few scary weeks, and I hope you and everybody around you are doing fine. But good things worked out, yeah?
Yeah, thank you. And it's also very interesting that we're speaking now around the release of Death Stranding 2, and because the entire theme of the series is connection, something we desperately need more of in the world. And moment like this, like me in Iran, you in Japan, talking about art and its impact that truly help like restore our hope for a better future.
For sure, yeah. No, it's always been Hideo's themes, that of anti-war and trying to, break down the barriers between people. So definitely the connections there are represented in both the games and the themes in and around them.
Yeah, let's go back. I'm really curious about your past. You were born in Sweden and now you're rocking it in Japan. Tell me, how was growing up in Sweden and what path led you to Japan?
Oh, this could be a very short or a very long story, but I'll try and land somewhere in the middle. I grew up in the north of Sweden in a pretty small town called Umeå, which has about like 110,000 inhabitants. So it's not a very big city, but fair to say that I was not a complete country boy, but also not a city boy. But growing up in that kind of culture, starting, figuring out what was fun for me in, daily life ended up being my path into music and started doing bands with my friends from an early age. I think we were around like 9 years old or so when we first got together to do a band and started doing covers and stuff like that. And that went all the way into high school. So I went to music high school, focused on music and becoming more of a multi-instrumentalist and learning a bunch of instruments. However, once I finished high school, I didn't feel like the normal path forward, like going to music school or university or focusing on something completely different, was really something that I felt strongly about at the time. It just seemed like, that's what you're supposed to do. But I wanted to do something more interesting. And I'd been interested in Japan and Japanese culture for quite a while. So I was at like one of the graduation parties in a sauna with a friend. And he's like, you know what you could do? You could just go to Norway and work for like a year and you'd have the money to be able to go to Japan and study. So like a week later, I think I got on a bus, went to Norway, got a job at like a warehouse, like packing shit up for supermarkets, and did that for about 8 months, I think. And then I had enough money to be able to come to Japan and study Japanese, and early on realized that I wanted to keep living in the country and further those studies. So that became a year and 9 months of Japanese study before I then went on to school. But deciding on the fact that I wanted to stay in Japan also meant that I had to, create a clear path for my career and future. And there's not a lot of good rumors about working in Japan as a salaryman. I think we all know how that seemingly is like, and the word karoshi is a word that is Japanese and people know about abroad because it actually happens so much here that people work themselves to death. So I really didn't want to do that, which led me to look into a path of becoming a musician or composer or whatever here in Japan. And I went to check out a few schools, and the schools that were open to me as a student abroad for furthering my studies as a musician were all sort of filled with kids who just started picking up their instruments. And I was like, I can't be in bands with these guys. I'm not going to become as good as I need to be as a musician. So that led me to think I have to do everything myself. So let's become a composer, basically. And as a composer, there's a fairly open market for newly graduated kids to get into a in-house full-time role as a composer within the gaming industry. So that's why I looked into different schools for that. Ended up at a school that was focused on music composition, again with focus on the game industry, which I attended for 2 years, got a job at Konami, and the rest is history, basically.
Wow. And looking back, do you think moving to Japan was about like finding something you lacked in Sweden, or was it about seeking something unique that no other country or culture could offer?
I think it was about just testing the waters and seeing if it fit me or not. It ended up being a perfect fit. I think the culture really fits my own personality. Realizing that I definitely wanted to live somewhere where it's like a big city and convenient, but also not as much of a hands-on culture like in the States, for example. People keep to themselves out here, which resonated with me as somebody who grew up in a smaller town in the north of Sweden, right? But it was just I always say to people who ask like what's a good tip to further your career, getting into the industry or anything. I think it's always just about like following your heart and trying out whatever you want to do. And even if it doesn't completely work out, you probably gained an experience that will be a good thing for your future. So to me, it was just, it worked out. And I've been living here for close to 20 years now. And I love the city. I love the country. Sure, I'll always be a foreigner while living here, but that's something you sort of get over while, you interact with the culture and the people here.
Yeah. And how much do you think the Japanese culture has shaped your lifestyle or your creative work?
Not sure how much it's shaped my creative work. I definitely, take in a lot of Japanese culture and music and so on and so forth, and not get into how much I make fun of some of the parts of it. But I definitely, know about it, but I don't think it's something that's really shaped me as a composer. I feel that's more of like the overall intake of like films and everything from all over the world that I watch definitely has shaped me that way. But I do feel like as a person, yes, whenever I go home or go to a different country, I feel like the traditions and cultural traits that currently are most impactful for me as a person are all based in Japanese culture currently. So like I'll be thrown off whenever I see people act a certain way that I feel like that you can do that in Japan. You know? So like I definitely feel like I've become more Japanese than Swedish, or at least not like I have not become what I would have become if I moved to the States, for example.
Yeah. And you mentioned that your first gig in Japan was working in Konami, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how did that happen? How did you approach it, and take us through detail?
So basically, the way hiring new employees here in Japan works is that there's a process of hiring people out of school, and you apply while you're still a student, like a year before you're even about to graduate. So, you know, I applied to a bunch of different game companies, went to interviews and did all that, and was actually offered a few roles before I ended up taking the one at Konami, which was, you know, composer at Konami. So I didn't really know what I was gonna do at the time, but it seemed like the company that had been working on the most titles that I at the time was interested in, and Metal Gear obviously being top among those. So yeah, it's basically just a cultural or countrywide process of hiring people out of school that you're just part of. Like I went to school for a year before I started applying to jobs, and you know, got my suit and went around and did that whole thing that you know, they tell you that you're supposed to apply for 100 jobs, for example, and a lot of people did. I was fortunate that you know, I applied to a few that I really was interested in, and got a job at the one I wanted to go to, and yeah, got into Konami. They had a big composer team spread out over different titles, with, you know, sound designers, engineers, and composers, about like 70 people, all in a big office, basically, around each other. And about 6 months in, the company was doing restructuring, and everybody got sort of shifted into separate teams, at which time I was offered the opportunity to move over to Kojima Productions. So, you know, I presented some of the music that I had done, and that was relayed to, you know, Hideo and the other bigwigs at Kojima Productions, and got the chance to join the team. And yeah, the team we were about 4 people on the composer team for Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes when we started out. It ended up being me for like the last 2 years of the whole production process. So, you know, it was a dive into the deep end when I first started there, but we had the time to create that game for I think I was there for about 4 years before we released Metal Gear Solid 5 Phantom Pain. Wow.
And during that time, were you a gamer, and did you know like Hideo Kojima?
Yeah, I think one of the really influential games for me growing up was definitely Metal Gear Solid, the first one. It was sort of the first time me and a friend, we played it together, and it's first time, and everybody says this because it's so true. It's like the first time a game felt like a movie at the same time. We were still sort of like figuring out English, so like our comprehensive skills weren't really there, because we were, you know, I think like 9 or so at the time. You know, figuring out how to get, is it the kernel's number or whatever, but it's like on the back of the box, and like those ideas were just like mind-blowing. So yeah, always played games. I wouldn't call myself like a hardcore gamer. I used to be like a Nintendo gamer, then became a PC gamer for like high school, and then when I was in Japan for the first time, first couple of years, didn't really have the time to play a lot of video games, but then, you know, got into PS3, Xbox 360 era, sort of when I got back into video games. Yeah, I play games on and off, but I also prefer to relax after work, watching like other people play games, watching their streams. So I do get a lot of intake of the latest releases that way, rather than actually interacting with them myself, just because, you know, after work, it's not something that I always feel like doing. But yeah, no, definitely I feel like I know everything about what's going on in the industry. I don't play enough games to call myself like a super active gamer, but like, 2 or 3 titles a year I'll get my hands on and play through.
Awesome. So take me back to the first time you met Hideo Kojima. How did it happen and what did you two talk about?
I think the first time we actually met in a way where it was actually like I wasn't just in a room in the same meeting room, was when I'd created the first draft of the music for the Ground Zeroes trailer, like the 25th anniversary event trailer, basically.
Yeah.
And I'd done that sound that was sort of the through line for that trailer, and Hideo really liked that. So that's probably what we talked about at the time. I can't quite remember. I only remember that I was really nervous. But we were talking about that trailer and what we were going to do with the music. And yeah, him saying that iconic, I guess, by now sound was sort of a good thing. Good job on that was really, rewarding. And yeah, again, it was like sort of always knowing that he was somewhere in the back of the office for the first couple of months, but that then actually meeting him was probably that time, I think.
Wow. All right. So throughout the years, walk me through your process when working on audio and music with Kojima. What's your routine? How do your conversations go?
Well, Hideo's very specific about all parts of game production and game design. Obviously, that goes for music and sound design as well. But I would say that he might be more conceptually involved with the sound design and music rather than, giving direct orders on exactly how to do everything. So like we'd talk about for music, for example, for Death Stranding, sort of like soundtracks that he'd been into and other things like he wanted to use found sounds for the soundtrack, like integrating like sounds of chains and stuff like that, I think were the specific sounds that he mentioned. So like it always starts out very conceptually. We talk about the themes and stuff like that. And then for sound design, I was the audio director for Death Stranding 1. I basically tried to gather as many cool conceptual ideas and stuff as possible and feed that to him and then present it with actual sounds. Like we'd talk about, so we're working with the sound team at PlayStation down in San Diego, and I went over there and we went out to record in the desert, sort of around where I think Coachella always is. And there's a lake there called the Salton Sea, which is basically a dead lake. Like they had like resorts out there in the 60s, but found out like the water would just get more and more acidic. So it was all, scrapped. Nobody really lives there anymore. And the water is like uninhabitable. And that meant that all the sea life, all the fishes just died out and washed up on the beach. And there's a beach full of just fish bones. So we grabbed a bunch of sand / bones from there and utilized that for the footstep foley for walking on the beach in Death Stranding. And like giving that idea, coming up with those ideas and feeding those to Hideo is probably one of the more, satisfying parts of that feedback loop of working around sound design and music for those games with them.
Wow. So you've also worked with other composers on these projects. What's the collaboration dynamic like, especially considering your role as audio director?
So for the first one, we have a lot of licensed music, which is Hideo's own stuff that like he's picked up that he likes and that he wants to put into the game. So I'm not really directly involved with that at all. And I worked with Joel Corlitz for some of the tracks for the game we worked together to build a sound and he did a bunch of sampling and created all these instruments for me. And he's also the guy who came with me to Sony studio in San Francisco, and we got a bunch of stuff from Home Depot to record, found sounds for that. So that's that collaboration. For Death Stranding 2, Hideo worked directly with Woodkid. I was not involved with that directly. I still to meet Woodkid, so looking forward to whenever that gets to happen. But it's when it comes to the songs and stuff like that, Hideo is very specific about like the people he works with, and having that connection with them directly is, I think, one of the things that he's very particular about and values.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about Death Stranding 2. So what were those first conversations like during the initial brainstorming stage, and how has the project evolved over all these years of development?
Yeah, well, I came in with the first assignment basically being the announcement trailer, and we're going to do BB's theme with Troy Baker singing was basically the intro to all of this. And that seemed pretty straightforward, but we also got into those early conversations about, so what are the themes this time around? And, there's definitely a darker side to the story this time around, but it's also much more connected with direct human emotion that I wanted to reflect. And basically the conversations were like, so how can we go beyond what we thought was 100% for the first game? How can we take this another step and interlock these themes into the soundtrack, and basically take the building stone from the first one, and while staying true to that, coming up with something that just expands that and makes it more interesting. And taking a single melody and making that into a song basically is sort of the idea. Obviously playing the game, I think a lot of people definitely feel like it's still the same Death Stranding, more of Death Stranding, but it's just, what was 100% before is 130 or 150% now.
Awesome. Yeah. Before moving to the next part, just wanted to quick question about, did you work on Lollipop Chainsaw as well?
How did you know?
I found it on the internet.
Oh, yeah. No, I did that as a student. I think I wrote like 3 songs.
Wow.
Out of which like two funk tracks and like 1 or 2 metal tracks. Out of one, I think, the earthquake in 2011 hit, and like my computer broke, and they only had the original MP3 demo of the song, and that ended up being the thing that went into the game. It's pretty fun. Yeah.
Did you work with Akira Yamaoka during that time?
No, not directly. I was working with my teacher at the time, Nobuko Toda, who is also a alumni of the Metal Gear Solid music team, to do that. So it's funny. I literally was at a friend's house the other day, and we were talking about like Suda 51 and Grasshopper games, and that came up. So we looked it up, and yeah, one of the tracks on the soundtrack that we could find was credited to Yamaoka Akira, but it's me. So it's funny looking at it that way.
Amazing. And now you're not in Kojima Production. You're like doing working as a freelancer with them. So how did that happen? And is this something that you're looking forward to expand your own studio?
Yeah. So I always wanted to have the freedom to work on many different things. When you're in-house at a game company, it's not that you're not allowed to, but you're also very busy with other parts outside of just creating the music. And it takes about 4 to 5 years to create a game. And I wanted to be able to expand upon the different types of projects that I could work on. That was always my goal. And I wanted to work in film and stuff like that as well. So it was fortuitous timing for me that I got permanent residency in Japan, so I could actually work as a freelancer. Otherwise, I would need, a sponsor for my visa. So that happened in 2021, I believe. And so, yeah, it was always my goal to go and work solely focused on creating music for different types of stuff. So I handed in my resignation and actually was quite surprised that Hideo at the time said, well, can we still reach out to you for more work? I didn't know what to expect. He could have, gotten angry with me or whatever, but that was very, a very positive separation there, and went on to work on a bunch of stuff now that's both like Japanese projects and foreign projects, and I really like the balance, and you can grow so much more as a composer when being able to work with not just different types of medias, but also different type of people and productions. So I've really relished this opportunity so far.
Amazing. I'm so excited about it, by the way. So, all right, moving on to the next segment, which I have this segment on the podcast called Penny for Your Thoughts, where I ask a mix of deep or sometimes absurd questions just to get to know my guest better. So, are you ready for it now?
No, give me 5 minutes. I need to get a coffee. No, it's good. Let's go.
All right, you can take your time. All right. So, first one. What's a sound from your childhood that still lives in your memory?
Oof, that's one. Oof, you should have sent that as an email question before, and I could have come up with a really good answer, perhaps.
Yeah, sometimes I think about it, like, should I send it beforehand? But I want to see the face when the first time I hit them.
To think of something that I thought of just recently, I would say it's not just a sound, it's a song, but it's like the intro song to a TV show that I watched every Friday with my family back in Sweden. That's called Fångarna på fortet, which is I think actually like in Europe, like a lot of countries did the same show. You basically go to this like offshore old prison outside of France somewhere, and you go through all these rooms trying to figure out puzzles, and you might get your teammates locked up and then you have to rescue them and stuff like that. But that old show and the theme song to it is something that I just recently thought of. So that would be my answer for that question.
Awesome. So next one. What's your go-to sampler?
Contact would be an obvious answer. I also like Sound Paint is fun for other reasons, but I created most my simple instruments for whatever quick sampling reasons in Contact.
Yeah. Next one. What's more important to you in music, beauty or truth?
I will read this question as, does music need to be more about music itself, or does it need to be informative? And in video games, you always thread the balance between the two. I've definitely tried to be more about the beauty for this game, for Death Stranding 2, than I was for the first one. You always need the player to know where they're supposed to go. But having music be enjoyable is such a thing that I think has been more and more lost in AAA gaming. So it's definitely something that I want to lean more into. So to answer your question, it's a balance, but I try to lean more into the beauty, especially in an industry where there has been too much focus on truth.
That's something very interesting that you've mentioned about AAA games, because I kind of like agree with you. Like, since the technology is so advanced now, and we're so focused on, how interactive the music is if the player does this and does that. And sometimes, in the middle of all of this, we lose the focus. Like, man, I just want to hear beautiful music just walking here. I don't need all that.
No. I think a good example on that for this year is obviously Expedition 33 has just bangers upon bangers, where it's like the music is also by the game design allowed to just be good music. Whereas when we're talking about more westernized AAA games lately, it's been a lot about, adaptive music and procedural stuff and just trying to get away from repetitiveness, which is a good thing, I think, too. I don't think that you should be listening to the same 90-second loop for 30 minutes straight, which was common back in the day. But I think something might have been lost somewhere when forcing us more and more into what we can do in video games that we can't do in linear media, which is a lot of that, adaptive music stuff. So it's trying to bring that back a bit. Yeah. And again, shout outs to Lorian who did the soundtrack for Expedition 33. Bangers upon bangers.
Yeah. What's something you believe about art or creativity that others might disagree with?
I believe that you don't need to be an emotional person to create good art. I think it can create good art from a very, simple standpoint of just wanting to do something cool. And I think a lot of the time, I'm not saying that other composers are lying, but a lot of the time people build up the way they created the music in a very beautiful way, when it's like, dude, you just wanted to write something cool. Come on, man. And that I think people are not, they're still afraid to admit to that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that one. All right, next one. What DAW do you use?
I work in Logic. I used to, for a minute at the beginning of Death Stranding, try to move over to Cubase. My computer did not want to do so for some reason. It just started chugging when I got to like 5% of the amount of tracks that I wanted. So I'm back in Logic for, the good part, 90% of my career since, before I was a student even.
Does it even matter to change DAW when you're at this level?
No, there are obviously things that I want them to add to the functionality in Logic that, they still haven't done after all these years. Like being able to have multiple video files in one session file is one of the stupid things they still haven't added. And some of the updates that have been coming in have been more focused on producers that are not in my industry. So that's sort of unfortunate, but as long as I can do everything that I need to do, and unless there's some like revolutionary thing that comes out and Logic just can't do that, in terms of being able to evolve myself as well. And unless something like that happens, I think I'll stay with Logic for as long as I can, at least.
Yeah. By the way, that question, what DAW you use, is the most absurd and stupid question you can ask, but it's so fun because it's so stupid. Last time I asked about
I mean, like it's sometimes you're talking to somebody and they're still in Digital Performer and you're like, why? But whatever.
All right, okay, next one. What's something you've unlearned over the years?
So this is actually like sort of a coming out thing that I've been thinking about for a couple of days now. Is I haven't written music for myself since I was a student. So
wow.
I was thinking about like, what would I write if I started to write something just, like a song for myself. And I'm not sure what that would be. So that's something that I definitely want to relearn.
Yeah. It's scarier to do something for yourself because you can do whatever you like, but like working on a game, it's just like a crazy script.
I mean, that's what most, artists, songwriters, people who don't work for specific projects like films or games, that's what they do all the time. So like you have to get into a certain mindset, I think, just and like if I were to do it, would people like it or not is obviously a scary question, but something that, if I have the time, I definitely want to try and do every so often.
All right, moving on to the next one. What emotion do you find the hardest to translate into music?
I would say love, because I feel like I'm always lying whenever I write something that's supposed to be about love, because I personally don't feel it when I'm writing it. So I feel like it's sort of a, I'm just putting something out there and seeing if people react the right way or not. So I always feel like a bit of like I'm faking it whenever I'm writing something that's supposed to be about that.
Yeah, I get it. So, last one. What's the funniest moment you've ever had with Hideo Kojima?
Not sure about the funniest. There's probably going to be one if I were to sit around for like 5 minutes to think about it. But I just today I was watching a stream of Death Stranding 2, and there's a scene where Sam picks up an apple, eats the apple, throws it into the bin, and keeps on missing and kicks the apple at the end. And that's literally what happened during the motion capture. We had Norman do that scene and just like tell him like, eat the apple however you want. We need you to eat an apple, ad lib. And so he did, and just kept on missing the bin and kicked the apple. And yeah, we finished that, obviously everybody laughing at the end of it. And I went up to Norman and said, thank you, Norman, for giving one of the animators like 2 weeks of overtime for messing up during the scene. And I think Hideo enjoyed that joke too.
Awesome. So you mentioned Norman. How is it working with such iconic actors and two of the Death Strandings?
Yeah, well, they're just people, and that's how I try to approach it most of the time. They all have their, quirks, and I try to. That's sort of like I pride myself on being able to sort of read the room and treat people the way they want to be treated, but it's still like you're just talking with another dude. Norman will be a certain way. Mads, first time I met Mads, he was like, "Oh, you're from Sweden," and he started speaking in Swedish to me. And I was like, "Oh, holy shit!" Because I was a bit nervous meeting him, but that just blew all that away. But again, yeah, they're just normal people, and I don't know. There might be a few of them out there who enjoy being, getting compliments and all of that. But we're all trying to make art together, so. Just treat them as people and give the feedback that is needed to get everything together, basically.
Yeah, great. All right, this is it, Ludvig. Man, your music crosses borders and nations, and no matter how hard life is for people around the world, your art creates moments of escapism, meditation, and excitement. So thank you so much for doing this, and I can't wait to see what you'll do next.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun. Always good to get an interview where you get some of those curveball questions as well.